Greetings and welcome to the Inside Sports Illustrated podcast, where each week we go behind the stories of Sports Illustrated and SI.com. I'm Richard Deitch, and our guest this week is the writer and author Jeff Benedict, who is part of an SI-CBS News partnership that explored the issues of gangs and sports in this week's magazine. Jeff, as many of you who have read this magazine know, is the author of a number of books. He's one of the country's foremost experts on athletes and crime. I believe he's a lawyer as well, and last I checked on his bio, teaches writing and mass media at Southern Virginia University. He can let us know what else he's doing now. Jeff Benedict joins us by phone. All right, Jeff, I was, in reading this piece, I was really struck by Katam Ham and his family and sort of the courage that they show living in a pretty tough area, trying to get their kid through Compton and into ultimately what they hope is a good college experience. So let's start from the beginning. How did you come upon he and his family for this piece?
Well, I had gone to Compton to cover a game between Compton High School and Dominguez, the other rival school in Compton. And before the game, I was just walking around the stadium, grabbing anybody who would talk to me and asking them questions. And I came upon this kid. He's wearing a uniform, number 2. It was clear he was a player on the team, and asked him if I could talk to him. It turned out to be Katam. I didn't know him at all. And my first question to him was, what do you want to be when you finish high school? And he said, I want to be a lawyer. And that's a very unusual answer for a star high school football player. Usually when you ask that question, they say, well, I want to be a pro athlete. And so my next question was, who's recruiting you? And he said, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, and Columbia. Another very unusual answer. And so then I said, well, have you ever been tempted to join a street gang? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because my father would kill me. And that told me he's got a father. And the reason that mattered to me is because most of the boys I was approaching didn't have fathers. And the coaches on both teams said most of their players don't have dads at home. So I got 3 very unusual answers from this kid. Number 1, he wants to be a lawyer, not a football player. Number 2, he's being recruited by Harvard. And number 3, his dad is very involved in his life and won't let him join a street gang. So I said to him, is your dad going to be at the game tonight? And he goes, my dad's at every game. And so that night, I met his dad. I found him in the stands. It actually took me half the game to find him. I went from one end of the bleachers to the other looking for this father, and I finally found him at about halftime. And when I found him, he was sitting with his wife, very unusual, and I literally got down at one knee so that I could be at eye level with them, and I talked to them for about a half an hour. And when they told me that the father said, he had been involved in a street gang in L.A. when he was a kid, his mother said that she had a brother that was incarcerated doing life without parole for a homicide that occurred during a robbery, and yet they'd been together 23 years, they'd raised 4 kids, and Katam was the one that they believed was going to, actually make it out of there and get a scholarship. I thought, this is a family that we need to know more about, and that's how it started.
One of the things in the piece addresses this notion of, there's a long-held tradition, whether it's mythology or not, of gangs leaving athletes alone. But this seems to no longer be the case, Jeff. Are athletes now targets of gangs, and if so, why?
I think it's definitely not the case anymore, if that in fact used to be the case. And I think with the situation we explored and saw in this piece is that, at least at the high school level, being a star athlete doesn't do much, if anything, to protect you from 2 aspects of gangs. Number 1 is they will target you just like they'll target anybody else. And number 2 is they will recruit you just like they will recruit anybody else. And so a young high school athlete who has the potential to go play college ball somewhere has really 2 problems. Is number 1 is, he could be killed or banged on by a gang because of where he lives or the color of clothes he wears or who he hangs out with. And number 2, he's going to face enormous pressure to join a gang for the simple reason that if you're in a gang, there's protection, there's camaraderie, and for a lot of these boys who don't have family to go home to at night, a gang is a substitute for that.
One of the things that was interesting to read in this piece, and kind of frightening, I would imagine, for those reading it, was just every day the decision-making process that Katam has to make when it comes to his own clothing. And I don't know, I imagine from reporting the piece, you were probably there with these guys in the morning, but he basically has to orchestrate what he wears, what route he takes to school. He has to think about things that so many kids around the country do not have to think about, correct? Every day.
Yeah, and that was one of the most memorable moments in the reporting of this story. Is I actually slept in Katam's bedroom when I did the reporting for this, and I was up before dawn to see what he does when he wakes up. And I was literally sitting on a cot at the base of his bed when his alarm went off, and I saw him get up and get out of bed. And I'll never forget watching him walk to his closet and pull a couple of different outfits off the hangers, look at them, put some back, and then ultimately settle on a multicolored plaid shirt and a pair of blue jeans. And I asked him about, clothing selection, and he said, very specifically that he doesn't wear all red or all blue clothing when he's going to school because he just can't afford to be mistaken for a Blood or a Crip in the neighborhood he lives in. And so it hit me so strangely that, something as simple as picking out your clothes is such a routine decision for most teenagers in America every day. It's a mindless exercise that they do, but it's not mindless for this kid. And for a lot of other kids like him who live in his neighborhood, it's a big deal to pick out what you're going to wear to school.
How, and maybe the better question is why, do you think Katam and his family trusted you to tell their story?
That's a good question. Whenever I approach anybody for pieces like this, where you really want to get deep access and be pretty intimate with a person or with a family, I mean, they have to trust you immediately and early, and so usually with them, with anybody like that, the best approach I think is to be. You can't fake sincerity. People know whether you're being sincere or not, and so it pays to be sincere, which means to be genuinely concerned and interested in their dilemma or their story. And then number two, to be just very honest with them and upfront and not pull punches. Don't hold things back, and let them know what you're about. And I did those things in those moments when I met them in the stands. The bleachers of a football stadium isn't the easiest place to make a pitch to somebody, but it worked, and we just established a rapport over the following weeks to where it got to the point where they felt comfortable allowing me to come in their home. And I assured them from the beginning that I wouldn't do anything in this story without their consent. I mean, their son is still a high school student, and so whenever I'm dealing with a high school student or a minor, I always work through the parents, and I think that's sort of like going through the front door. And basically looking them in the eye and saying, look, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm trying to do, and with your permission, I'd like to proceed, and that's what we did here.
All right, one last topic, Jeff, and this was a pretty interesting study, I thought, that was in the middle of your piece, and it's a study that you quoted conducted among 120 BCS conference schools and 10 other universities with D1 basketball programs. And the study concluded that nearly 70% of campus police chiefs and athletic directors who responded believed gang members were participating in athletics at either their schools or another institution. 70% is a really large number. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're right, but this is a perception study, and I thought that was really telling. One, do you buy that statistic? And two, what did you make just of the response and the high response that 70% of these campus police administrators and athletic directors believed that gang members were playing in Division I athletics?
Well, honestly, it didn't surprise me. It is a high number, but considering who the source is for that number, campus police chiefs would know better than anybody, because when any of these guys get into trouble, or when their friends come to campus and get into trouble, the police find out. And so they're a really good source to interview versus, say, if you interviewed a college president who would have no clue about something like this. And so I think one of the strengths of that study, and the reason that we got so interested in that study, is because the guys who conducted the study went to the sources, the campus police chiefs, the athletic directors, and the players themselves. And so their perceptions are perceptions, but they're pretty well-informed perceptions.
Do you think, there's always this notion that coaches, and we've certainly done our fair share, as of you, on the idea that coaches don't want to know about players' backgrounds. Do you think that there is whether it's Division I basketball coaches or Division I football coaches, do they intentionally not want to know about their players' backgrounds if they were indeed part of a gang in high school?
I think they want to know, but I think it's one of those things where they don't want to know too much. Obviously, there's no coach that wants to bring a ticking time bomb to their campus and invite problems and embarrassments to a team and to a school. But on the other hand, I think a lot of these coaches, they know what they're getting into when they go into some of these neighborhoods and they're recruiting the top athletes and they want to win at the highest level. I think there is a degree of, I don't want to see, I don't want to hear, I don't want to smell. And oftentimes they don't know the nitty-gritty. They may know a little bit, and as long as there's not something hitting them right in the face saying, you definitely don't want to recruit this kid, then they will. And, when we were in Los Angeles, we spent a lot of time with the gang unit at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And it was interesting to talk to them, and they said the guy that we talked to, who's the head of the gang unit, knows a lot of the high school players there, and knows who's in a gang and who isn't. And he said in all the years he's worked there, he's never once had a college recruiter or coach contact him or his department to ask about any of these players that are being recruited. And I think that is far more telling than the statistic in the study, is that these coaches there has never been an instance where a coach has gone to the gang unit and said, hey, by the way, we're looking at this kid, Joe X from so-and-so team. Have you had any run-ins with this kid? You know anything about him? That, to me, says a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating, actually. That's really interesting. When does young Mr. Ham have to decide on a college?
Well, I guess by February, when National Signing Day comes around. And so he's got a few months, and it'll be an interesting few months for him. I think another reason that I thought he'd be great to profile in the magazine is because, when you talk about a model student athlete, it's a package. It's not just athleticism. It's not just good grades. It also includes character. And I think that the thing that's amazing about this kid is he's got all three. He's a very good athlete. He's a very good student. But most of all, he's got some pretty unusual character traits that really make him stand out. Yeah, I'm sure I speak for a lot of readers who will absolutely be rooting for him and will be following him as he makes his decision. Jeff Benedict, the noted, I should say, writer and author, is part of his SI-CBS News partnership that explored the issues of gangs in sports in this week's magazine. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably read the piece, and it's indeed really interesting. Jeff has done a lot of work on the subject of athletes and crime, and absolutely one of the country's foremost experts on that subject. Jeff, I'm sure you'll be back in the magazine and on SI.com again soon. We appreciate your time, and best of luck heading forward. Thanks for joining the podcast. Thank you. Well, our thanks to Jeff Benedict, who, again, does really interesting work and wrote an interesting piece in this week's magazine. Absolutely encourage you to check out his previous work. Just type him up into Google. I think he also has his own website. I believe it's jeffbenedict.com, and you can see some of his remarkable work on there. All right, for our guest, Jeff Benedict, for our producer, Ben Eagle, this is Richard Deitch. We'll see you next time on the Inside Sports Illustrated podcast.